I'd like to thank you for watching our podcast. We continue our study through the book of First Corinthians, and today we're in First Corinthians, the 15th chapter, verse number 11. Now, the Apostle Paul has started the 15th chapter, and he's talking through the whole chapter about the resurrection. And the last 3 days, we brought to you evidence of the resurrection. The evidence was, first of all, scriptural. It was in the Bible, or in the Old Testament. Number two, the evidence was in his physical appearing. We call it historical evidence, actually factual evidence. And then Paul, yesterday, we talked about how Jesus appeared to the Apostle Paul and how it was the grace of God, not Paul's learning, not his stance in the religious world, but it was the grace of God that caused Paul to do everything that he did. And now, today, in verse number 11, we're going back and we're talking about the resurrection. Now, listen to what Paul says. Whether then it was I or they, so we preach and so we believe. Now, what's he mean, whether it was I or they? Well, you need to understand that there were several different people that actually preached in the city of Corinth. Apollos was one of them. We don't know if Peter actually went to the city of Corinth himself, but the writings of Peter were influential in the church at Corinth. And there was other people that came in and they preached. What did they preach? They preached the resurrection. You know what I think we need to do more of in our churches today, and I'm not being critical, I'm just giving some advice, but we need to preach the resurrection. And we'll find out more later as we continue this study of the resurrection. But the resurrection and the fact of the resurrection is absolutely essential. I said on Monday, I believe it was, that if you attend a church that doesn't believe in the bodily resurrection of Jesus and the bodily resurrection of the saints, go find another church. It is essential to our Christian faith that we believe and put our faith and trust in the resurrection of Jesus. That's why we have scriptural evidence of his resurrection and death, burial, and resurrection. That's why we have the witnesses that saw Jesus. They actually saw him. They actually saw that he was in a physical body. Thomas, he said, Thomas, come and touch me. Jesus and his disciples are actually out fishing, and Jesus comes on the shore and he's cooking. He's making breakfast and he's eating fish and he's eating honey. Now, that's the scriptural evidence that you should be eating more fish. Anyway, Jesus came and he appeared. And that's what they preached in the city of Corinth. That's what they believed in the city of Corinth at one time. Now, what has happened? There are people that have come into the church at Corinth, and they have begun to say Jesus did not raise from the dead in bodily form. Now, let's move on to verse number 12. Now, if Christ is preached that he has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say that there is no resurrection from the dead? What's been going on in Corinth? In fact, I think we've got scriptural proof that to deny the resurrection causes moral problems. And we'll get into that. I don't know if we'll get into that tomorrow or not, but next week for sure. I've got scriptural proof that to deny the resurrection actually gives way to moral problems. And how many of you realize that the church at Corinth was full of moral problems? They were getting drunk at communion. They were having sex with people that they shouldn't have been having sex with. You see, I can't stress enough that the resurrection of Jesus is so essential. And Paul now is talking about that some among you, some in the church, some that are coming to the church services are saying that there is no resurrection from the dead. And personally, I believe that's the primary reason why there's so much pride, why there's so much arrogance and so much boasting and so much immoral problems in the church at Corinth, is because there's somewhere, someplace, somehow, we don't know who these some are, but they've come in and they've said, you know what? There is no hope of the resurrection. We need to understand that hope is extremely powerful. And when you take out the resurrection, you know what you do? You destroy the hope of believers. Now let's move on to verse number 13. But if there is no resurrection from the dead, not even Christ has been raised from the dead. We need to understand that the Apostle Paul is saying you cannot separate the resurrection of Christ and our resurrection. If there is no resurrection, he's talking about the resurrection of believers here. He said if there is no resurrection, then even Christ wasn't raised from the dead. You see, Christ's resurrection gives us as believers this assurance that someday we, whether we die or whether we are taken in the rapture, which is going to be the great resurrection, no matter what, we as believers are going to pick up a new body. We're not going to just float around like a bunch of ghosts. That's a bunch of heresy. But we are going to pick up a new body, and we are going to experience life without limitation. Why? Because number one, because Jesus rose from the dead. Number two, because we believe in the resurrection. And so he tells us that we cannot separate the resurrection of believers and the resurrection from the dead. Because Jesus rose from the dead, we as believers will also rise from the dead. Not as ghosts, not as some spirit, but as a person with a physical body that has no limitations, no disease, no sorrow, none of the limitations. But we will have a physical body. Verse number 14, and if Christ has been raised from the dead, has not been raised from the dead, our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. What's he saying? He's saying that the resurrection of Jesus is essential to preaching. Our preaching is fruitless. Our preaching is not going to accomplish anything. You see, when a person comes forward and they give their lives to Jesus, you know what happens? That's an evidence of resurrection. Our preaching is in vain. And then he ends verse number 14 with these words, and our faith, or your faith, is in vain. It's empty. Our faith is built on the fact that Jesus bodily resurrected from the dead. Understand that. Thank you for watching.